Okay.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining. We got a pretty tight schedule. We've got 57 minutes. So I want to get started off. Welcome to all the participants who are on the call. We've got about 15 folks who have joined, and I think we're waiting for another couple. I think we've had about 60 or 70 say they're going to join. We're going to get started with introductions, and then we're just going to go right into the topics. For this webinar, the real goal is to talk about really, I think impacting investing is something that our panel has worked with for a long time. It's growing in sort of notoriety, but I think there's questions around what is it, what isn't impact investing. And the goal of this is to try to help everybody just understand kind of some of the different parameters in the spectrum of what impact investment is, talk a little bit about the financial benefit of it, focus on some people's stories and their engagement and how they got involved into impact investing and why, and then have a brief discussion about the tools that can be used to measure and track impact, how that ties to financial performance. We've got a couple local experts who are regional experts who can talk a little about the ecosystem in Central and Southern and Eastern Europe. A handful of our panelists also have a more global perspective and can talk about what's happening from a global level or in a particular region. So we draw in some focus on Central and Eastern Europe and Southern Europe, but also bring in kind of what's happening writ large, because a lot of the drivers are coming from the United States and sort of parts of Europe. So driving some of that energy, but it's being adopted and picked up in different regions differently. My name is Ben Yonkman. I've been working in the social entrepreneur space for 10 or 15 years. I've worked on the entrepreneur side. I've also worked on the capital allocation side around the world in Latin America, North America, and Europe, and Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. So a lot of different perspectives focused on fintech, health tech, data technology, data tech for good, housing, connectivity, quite a range of different issues. And I think they can all, tying them back to impact has been an interesting journey to figure out how that works. But I'd love to introduce our panelists. I'm going to go in Zoom democratic order from who I see from right to left. Mirko, would you like to introduce yourself to the group?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Mirko from Nvidia, blockchain-based fintech startup formed in 2020. Nowadays, part of the consortium of companies that are building the open source investment protection tool within NGI through GLO, which is part of the Next Generation Internet Initiative by European Commission. Previously, I led teams in 3 corporations and multiple startups in Central and Eastern Europe. Happy to be here, and thanks for the invite.
Great, thank you very much. Christina, would you like to introduce yourself next, please?
Yes, I'm Christina Collier, originally from New York City. I moved to Europe in 2010. 2012 is sort of when I started my entrepreneurial journey, and first venture-backed startup was a circular economy platform that was connecting neighbors to lend and borrow and rent household items. So already back then, this was maybe 6 years ago, we were thinking about how to measure the efficacy of our platform from a social and an environmental perspective. So I've been sort of thinking about this from an entrepreneurial perspective for a while. Was there for 2 years as a COO, then left to co-found a video marketing technology startup called Autheos, was the CEO of that for 5 years. We sold it last year. And since then, I've been using my own capital to invest in early stage founders, particularly those that have been historically underfunded. So those are typically founders with a certain level type of ethnic diversity or gender diversity. And a lot of my investments have been in the social impact space, whether it's coming from a fintech angle, for instance, and I've also been investing in environmentally impactful startups, also the early stage. So, and beyond that, I'm working with a lot of later stage venture capital companies as sort of a follow-on to build relationships for follow-on offerings for my portfolio companies. And obviously a lot of those are in the impact space. So it's something that I've been thinking about for the last 12 to 18 months on how to really measure the impact of my portfolio. So looking forward to this conversation today.
Great, thank you very much, Christina. Andreas, I will actually see you next week at your conference. Do you want to introduce yourself and the organization you represent?
Yes, sure. So thanks very much for the invitation. I'm Andreas Baresel-Bofinger, German, for the last 20 years, resident here in Greece. I have a multiple study background from law, economics, IT, and PhD in green supply chain management. And I worked as a EU projects coordinator at an ICT business association, management consultant in an ICT business incubator, and also in Germany, managing my company previously connected to Bofinger Furniture. But what's important for here, so I developed over all these years here in Greece an interest in also the startup scene here in this corner of the world. And the last couple of years, as you all know, it was really progressing amazingly. And in 2015 we founded the Hellenic Business Angel Network with the intention to tap on this potential of startups and of business angels here. And we are in the train of developing this further and further. And this interest in impact investment came also from a personal background, since I had also some health issues and thinking about the world, the essence of life and all that. So I really think that investment has the obligation as well to think about impact investment. So I'm very happy to be here at the panel.
Great, thank you very much. And we're going to talk a little bit about the responsibility of venture capital and the responsibility to return impact versus to return financials to the LPs and kind of specifically the role of angels where they can sit within the impact spectrum. I'm going to turn over to Kim. Kim is actually one of our past cohort participants. She graduated from one of our programs, was peer selected, received some grant funding from us, but she has gone and grown a phenomenal tool that I'll let her tell you about, and she's going to focus a little bit later in the call about the different types of tools you can be using, because there's a lot of them out there for impact measurement.
Thanks, Ben. So my name's Kim Abbott. I'm the CEO and founder of Vested Impact, which, as Ben kind of said, it's a platform that assesses and quantifies the impact of companies outwardly on the issues that matter to us. And perhaps uniquely, the way we do it is leveraging kind of over 100 million impact data points from the development world who've measured impact for decades, and to kind of bring that to the private sector. My experience, I'm an engineer by background, and my previous experience was actually working for the UN, where I helped build their performance and impact measurement data platform for peacekeeping. So yeah, as Ben said, my foray into this was really coming from that development world and understanding impact can be measured well. It's just not done perhaps as well in the private sector, and how could we help solve that problem? So thank you, and look forward to sharing more later.
Great, thank you very much. Adrian, would you like to introduce yourself? You were instrumental in kind of putting this panel together and coming up with this idea. Maybe a little bit about why you wanted to put this together, some of the reasons that you've seen from the field and in the space that you're at, why you thought it's an important conversation to have.
Sure. Thanks, Ben. My name is Adrienne Thrash. I'm one of the 3 managing partners of Anthology Ventures. We're a startup studio, an angel-funded startup studio, working mostly in South and Central and Eastern Europe with startups. We are very interested in impact work. Most of, if not all of our startups do have an impact component. Several of them are specifically impact driven. We are not an impact company yet, I like to say, but we're very, very interested in moving forward the conversation about impact investing in this part of the world, because it's gotten a lot of attention in Northern Europe and the Americas for sure, but down in the southern part of Europe, it's kind of a beginning conversation on many levels. And so we hooked up with Village Capital, and we're very excited to develop the idea all together. We hope that it will be, the beginning of an exploration of impact, and specifically how we can really do well by doing good as investors, as angels, as entrepreneur support organizations, all together, and hopefully make some good for the world, as well as making a little money at the same time. So thank you all very, very much for being here. Looking forward to all of your viewpoints.
Great, thank you. And then Vera, I might change it up because we're running a little bit behind on time. If you could give your introduction and then maybe respond to the first question that I have. I think in the world of impact investing, like it's quite a spectrum. How you define impact, I think, depends on your focus on gender, on geography, on sort of geographic diversity. I think there's a lot on sector, on financial returns. There's a lot of different factors that go into impact. And I think everybody, just like sustainability is a really broad umbrella term that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. You have kind of a global perspective. You've seen impact in a lot of different regions. But could you maybe give your general overview on kind of impact, what is impact investing, and then also kind of what you would differentiate or some areas to think about what it is not, because I think there's a large conversation, and I think a lot of the folks here are, what is impact investing? Maybe we can start there, Vera.
Thank you. I'll be super brief with my introduction. My name is Vera Kotariansky. I'm based in Dubai. I'm the CEO and founder of Veritas Ventures. Right now, I'm building a community for high-achieving women, women who always give, inspire, mentor, to really have a place for them to be inspired. And with that, I also plan to have an impact, because I think only a community is becoming a key word anyway, always been, but even more so with the Web3 conversations we're having. It really is all about community. So that's my goal for the next, I know somebody at the door. So yeah, I'm not going to open, it's okay. Yeah, so building this community. Previously, I've been in the tech world for about 10 years as a founder myself, then as an ecosystem builder with Dubai government, and then as a venture capitalist, managing the region for 500 startups now called 500 Global. So impact, I know it's a big word, and many people use it potentially or maybe without really kind of understanding what it is and what it isn't. Like you say, I think probably the key word in that, what I think is important, is the intentionality behind it. You really have to be intentional about why you invest, what you invest, and what impact you can have with that. In the conversations I've been having over the last few years, I really noticed that people have moved from this idea, investors I've been talking to, that, oh, okay, good, if I invest in something that is, you know, kind of good for others, it means I probably won't have a return on investment. So impact investing is about doing good and having that return on investment. And if you look at studies, for example, GIN, the Global Impact Network, they've done great studies on showing how it actually has evolved, how you can have, you know, a return. You either, you know, you almost exceed, you know, your return as well on the money invested. So I think it's about intentionality. It's about, and I think Kim will be talking about it more about measuring. So I think it's about, you know, how you really measure. Microfinance is being brought a lot as an example, or I mean, for me, anything connected to well-being has a big impact, because if you really take care of yourself, it has an impact not just on you, but also on, you know, on the people around you. What else? Maybe I'll stop here so I don't talk too much and pass on to somebody else. But in general, what I'm really happy to see, what has changed in the last few years, that people have moved from thinking that investing in people who are trying to change the world is philanthropy. So we moved on from thinking that this is philanthropy to understanding that this is actually, there is a return on investment when you invest in people who are consciously and intentionally creating something good for the world.
Yeah, thanks, Vera. And if you need to get that door, you can go ahead. I will hold off any questions for you until you're back. I think at Village Capital, I mean, everyone's going to define how they think about impact differently, and that's one of the unique challenges, but also the opportunities. I think it's good to have difference of opinion on that. At Village Capital, we look a lot on founders with lived experience who really understand a challenge and they're solving a particular pain point, right? So I think in the past, like impact has seen in different regions it's evolved, but like philanthropy plus is how I think a lot of folks over in sort of parts of Europe still think about it. It's like a nice thing to do, but it doesn't have financial returns. I think that if you're working with somebody solving a very painful problem for a large portion of people, you can innovate on how you can do a different business model, make money from that, and make returns. I think one of the biggest challenges is that investors typically don't pay companies to track their impact metrics. That might be changing with some of the regulations that are coming in, but for a company, it's very costly to track a lot of this stuff. And so that's where the measurement angle, I think, has been absent from the conversation. So it's a lot of anecdotal sort of information, but there's no standardized tracking platform yet. And we'll talk a little bit about that more. But in terms of impact, what it is or what it isn't, I'd love to invite the other panelists to kind of weigh in. Andreas, I'd like to hear maybe from your perspective regionally, where you see it in the conversation, but also give a chance for Mirko, Kim, and Christina to jump in.
Thanks, Ben. From my perspective, I think I would like to emphasize also the point of view of a business angel. Okay, it's not a VC. It's not so strictly set what is our agenda. I would say a business angel is rather free in putting the guidelines. But we as a business angel network, what we like to do, and here I have to say we are in the beginning of the process, to install this understanding of impact investing as we just defined it. I mean, there are more definitions out there. If we go into this, it will be a little bit too complicated. It's not charity. Philanthropy is again something else. But to make with your personal engagement, with your personal money, a difference, I think that is the freedom of a business angel. And maybe it's also the responsibility. It's not an obligation. I mean, we, as in our association, our network, we don't have obligatory guidelines. You know, you have to have a certain percentage of your investment in this sector or in this kind of realm of companies. You are more or less free. What we would like to do, and how I understand it, is to educate people, individuals who have the means to invest their private money according to guidelines that going along these principles of impact investment in the best sense. And here, the local perspective in Greece, as Adrian also mentioned it before, there is still ground to cover, to understand, you know, what we are talking about, and then slowly going into this process. So I like the journey, but we are at the beginning of the journey.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of different people, they're at different stages and it evolves differently. I think there's a lot of flavors of impact investing, and some of it can be geographic. I think also in your perspective, what sectors you are in, what's relevant to the challenges that you're facing can be quite different. The sectors in parts of Africa that we've worked in North and Sub-Saharan Africa, the reality of their needs are very different from the folks that we work with in Latin America, as well as the folks that we work with in Europe, where there's still a huge opportunity for impact investing. So I do think it depends on the geography and the ecosystem. Let's see, Christina, maybe it'd be helpful you've kind of evolved in your pathway towards in impact investing, and you don't have to jump in your story, or maybe it's a good opportunity to talk about I think you've looked at it through kind of different lenses of founders and some of the challenges that you saw in the broader venture capital landscape of who could access capital at what point. I think there's also impact investing is definitely about an equitable access point. There's a foundational part that's underlying a lot of it. Maybe you could speak a little bit to that and your experience with that and kind of what brought you into the world of impact investing.
Yeah, and when you mentioned a bit about, you know, how Village Capital, so sort of a caveat, I am on the board along with Vera actually of one of the accelerators of Village Capital. But when you mentioned that the types of founders that you seek out are also those that are really addressing a sort of personally experienced pain point. And that's a lot of that really resonated with you when you mentioned it, because a lot of what drew me into impact investing, and when I say impact investing, for me, a lot of it is around, from the social perspective. There is the environmental as well, but from a social perspective, a lot of what I do on a day-to-day basis is just trying to reach out to other founders that I sort of self-identify with from an ethnicity perspective, so Black and Brown, and gender perspective, so other female founders, knowing that here I'm based in the Netherlands, and I there are so few of us in the startup ecosystem that are in leadership positions, having founded companies, having raised a certain amount of capital, having been in a CEO position for a number of years. There are so few of us there, and I've been very often been the one of the only in the room. And that for me has been pretty frustrating because I actually started my career before tech in financial services. I was at Goldman Sachs in New York and London, and already 12 years ago, we were having these same conversations, albeit in the States for the most part, but same conversations around the few senior most folks in the firm being represented from a ethnicity and gender perspective. So a lot of what I like to focus on now is trying to find ways to redistribute how capital is allocated, especially at those earliest stages. So when I think many of us have spoken on panels around, what are the sort of root causes of certain dynamics that exist in terms of representation at the later stages of the startup and scale up ecosystem. And if it really comes down, there is the pipeline in a sense in that I've done research on this to understand how many of these founders of color and female founders are able to fund themselves in the beginning. And it is most times bootstrapped, sacrificing a side hustle for a number of years until they reach a certain level of traction, because perhaps either they don't have within their own immediate network access to rich individuals who they can tap for their friends and family network, nor do they have necessarily an understanding of how to access those types of networks if they don't immediately, they're not immediately in their sort of sphere of network. So what I've been trying to do is just be visible so that a lot of these founder profiles know of me, and then I invest in certain cases. I try to also just connect them with other angel investors that do pre-seed, or other VCs that do sort of pre-seed and seed, and also just share best practices on what has been, good terms and bad terms that I've seen come across as deals were being created. So when I think of impact investing, I'm also thinking of it from a sort of legacy perspective. What do I want my legacy to be? How do I want to have the sort of scope of my own impact from a personal perspective, so that my daughter and son can sort of have the best opportunity for themselves as they get older? So that's how I think of impact. And so I have, as Andreas was mentioning earlier, how business angels have a little bit more autonomy and have a little bit more freedom to invest in the ways that they want and define impact in the way they want. That I do that a lot, and it's more from a personal perspective, like who do I sort of recognize having the same challenges that I've experienced in the past. And unfortunately, I do feel like with these sorts of socially oriented investment opportunities, whether it's based on founder profile or based on platforms or products that are addressing a certain demographic or community, I do still think that a lot of investors look at that as philanthropic and don't see the commercial opportunities. And that's, I think, a perspective that we need to really shift through dialogues like this.
Yeah, thanks for that's a great segue to the next point. Yeah, I think founder diversity, gender, sort of background diversity, founders of color is something we focus on a lot. I think there's basically power structures that were created to kind of not be as inclusive as they could. And so a lot of it is, how do you fix certain structures to address some of those institutional issues? And I think there's also part of that. But your point about financial viability, I think, is what we're going to try to segue into next. Mirko, I think I was maybe going to point to you about how have you seen investors kind of balancing impact metrics with financial returns and balancing that. And I think we'll move on to Kim, but maybe after that, we'll talk a little bit about what isn't impact investing. And I'd like to direct that to you, Adrian, but let's talk about, like, okay, if it's not philanthropy, how are you making money if you're also doing good? And Mirko, maybe you want to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, of course. As Andreas said, there's like many definitions about impact investing, and it's definitely not philanthropy, although it has its, I would say, pleasures. But when Vera mentioned microfinance and social investing, that is something that is similar. But in the case of Professor Yunus, I would say that doesn't bring profits. In case of impact investing, it's really connecting the profits and the impact that you're creating. And in that sense, I would think that there are three pillars of impact investing. This is the financial pillar, that is the impact that you create, and I would say your level of taking the risk, both socially and financially. And in that sense, I would say that I'm pretty optimistic about impact investing. And I would say that it's a huge paradigm shift that is not happening right now, I would say, but it will happen in the future. And the most investors will need to choose between impact investment or investment with the impact, which would be, I would say, the first stage in this process. What is really important here to mention is that investors wouldn't have much choice in the future when we speak about impact investing. There are some grim predictions by Mark Carney, for example, from former government Bank of Canada in England, that says that those companies that don't look into the climate issues, they will go bust. So in that sense, I think that as we live in the information age, early on connection of financial and impact that you can create is really important, because in the future, I would say that you wouldn't have a choice. So in that sense, I would say that first, there is no better time to start with impact investing than right now. And second, later on, you might not have a chance, because investors, and I speak to the audience right now, that are first-time investors, for example, in the impact investment, should choose how they invest now, because in the information age, we will know what they did in the past. And what is basically the case here is that with our open source research, we're basically creating these triggers that will also protect investors, but will showcase the behavior and how people behave in the very beginning of this era. So I would recommend impact investing right now. Why? No better time than right now. And why? Because it could be later on. And I would say for the very fact of the region, there is no better time to invest in the region itself. We can come to these points, and for example, for the research performed by the Deloitte and PwC, that really showcase that this is the right time to invest in this region. So we can linger upon that.
Yeah, there's a comment in the chat. Maybe if you want to respond, just you could write it in directly. I think that if you could explain what the 3 pillars of impact investing are from your perspective, that could be helpful. That's a good segue. I think, yes, again, what we're hearing, there's going to be a lot of different regional interpretations of what impact investing is. I think getting to how you define that, and then also like what your financial returns are. Right. I think in the United States, our fund that was investing in, we invested in 100 different early stage startups. We were looking for market-based returns. We were focused, a lot of the work went on finding different business models, but we were still expecting to hit same market. That's what our LPs were expecting us to do. I think angels have a different flexibility in what they want to be looking at. You know, and what are you doing? Are you doing a 10x return? Are you looking for 10x from 1 out of 10 of your companies? I mean, as a lot of traditional venture capitals do. Are you playing a little bit more, you know, more, most of them are getting 2 to 3x. So are you, what's your risk tolerance? I think also has to get factored into how you're thinking about your portfolio and your strategy. I did want to maybe open the floor for Adrian. I think like, you know, when it can be how you think about impact investing is going to change. It could be like who has access to the capital, where are they based, what is their problem solving. But as Mirko touched on, a lot of people are going to get involved, and there's a lot of noise around like if you're not doing impact investing, you're going to be left out. And I think the entrance of some large organizations like BlackRock, including becoming the largest impact investor in the world, I do think there's a risk a little bit of, because it's such a sort of, I wouldn't say squishy field, there's a lot of interpretations of what village capital, about what impact investing can be from a lot of different organizations. And I do think there's a risk of impact washing or greenwashing. And Adrian, maybe you can talk a little bit about what is it not, or how can you avoid, I think many of it's well-intentioned, but there's also a marketing play of saying I'm an impact investor, but are you actually investing in the right founders in the best way? So if you could speak a little bit about what isn't impact investing, or how can individuals avoid, well, just being honest to their commitment to it and visible and transparent, because I think a lot of it's like a transparency. I don't think it's not necessarily fundamentally bad actors, but I do think it's levels of understanding, and you do have incentives to present yourself one way, but also be very hard-nosed about, you know, your return expectations.
Well, thanks, Ben. I'll just wade into the minefield here. After we've heard so many different perspectives from actual impact investors here, I think that, you know, that it's kind of the 50 million impact question, or how, whatever currency you want to put on it, right? Which, and you know, it does go to a lot of the points that we're dealing with here, which has to do with you know, investors. I mean, the difference between an angel investor versus an institutional investor, who has responsibilities to their LPs, versus an angel who has responsibility to themselves. And so each different investor is going to come to their criteria, you know, individually, obviously, based on their specific circumstances. So I think to say what it, you know, a hard answer of what it's not, I don't think we can come to. Other than, you know, obviously situations like greenwashing are definitely going to be happening. They already are. I mean, there's, you know, a lot of well, the most recent example of greenwashing is you know, the fashion industry rebranding plastic as, you know, vegan leather and responsible fashion, right? There's a huge New York Times piece that just came out 2 days ago about that. And I think this is, you know, very much a possibility to happen in the impact investing space, where people who, or institutions, whoever, who have an interest in kind of upping their portfolios or upping their branding, may somehow, let's say, spin the results of some of their investments. On the other hand, and so, you know, I think it has to do with both intention, but also if the individual investors, whether they're a fund, you know, an institutional investor or an angel, or a syndicate, if there is a thesis behind the investments that they can really kind of examine, and that's partly, you know, it's on us as individuals, but it's also on us as observers to really say, okay, you know, why did you make this investment? How do you see that this is an impactful use of funds, right? What are you expecting to achieve by this? Because there's also a difference between outcome and impact. You know, the outcomes of certain actions, you know, that a company may perform, right? Or that we may achieve by investing in a company. Those outcomes are going to be very clear fairly quickly, typically, right? But the actual impact, if we really want to go down into the weeds on that, can be a much longer term metric. And I think Kim's going to really give us some specific ways to kind of quantify those things. But that's why I feel like, you know, we kind of are on the edge of a very new era, where I feel like a lot more, as Mirko said, very, very truly, a lot more decisions are going to be made based on slightly, you know, seeing the world through this new lens of climate collapse, diversity, the need for equity, and so forth. And so these kinds of lenses, coupled with metrics to really help us understand how we're making progress on these issues, are going to help us come up with a framework for sort of what it is. And there's always the what it isn't question, I think, is always going to be a little bit squishy, as you said, Ben. I don't think I answered your question, but I think maybe what Kim can do is get us a little closer to that.
No, it's a terribly hard question to answer, very loaded, and there's a lot of wrong answers. A lot of people disagree with you on that, and there's
probably,
a lot of arguments to say this is actually impactful versus it's not. I know I have those conversations with my team all the time. Kim, I'm going to turn over to you in a second, because I think we've got about 33 minutes left. Enough time. I think we're doing fine. One question from Viara: how are KPIs, key performance indicators, defined? Are they defined by your limited partners or by venture capitalists themselves? look, I think it's a conversation that you have to have with people who are investing in a fund. A limited partner for those, or the people who give you money, and you have fiduciary the venture capitalist has fiduciary responsibility to manage that money and get returns. And I think you often negotiate what kind of companies you're going to be looking at. And that's the time to talk about where you want to be focusing, what your financial expectations are, how big is a fund, how big is your ticket size? Like, those are all things that you have to negotiate. So it's always going to be a conversation between the LPs and the VCs. And once you set those expectations, that's kind of what they're going to be looking for. And so if you're not hitting your numbers, just when they're expecting their returns, be it impact or monetary, and this is where the term patient capital came from a long time ago, is that some impact investments needed a longer term to mature, rather than sort of like a typical fund is about a 10-year cycle, and they hope to start to see some of those returns starting in year 5. And so if you are, receiving impact investment at the, year 5 or 6 of a fund that's looking to return their money to LPs in 4 years, you better be able to return that fast. And so it's a lot on the company side as well, of like what type of capital they want to be raising. So I think it's a longer question. That it's a discussion that happens with LPs and VCs. Vera, I'm sorry, did you want to weigh in?
If I may comment on that as well, I saw that question in the chat too, and I think it's really important to be very selective about both your LPs and your investors. I always tell startups, be selective, don't just take any money, because once you have an investor on your cap table, it's very difficult to get rid of them, right? So you have to take money as a startup from an investor, or as a VC from an LP who is really aligned with the values you have. You can only achieve impact if you have people with you on board whose values are, aligned with yours. So even if it takes longer, but I'm convinced that it's the only way for us really to make impact. Have people on board who agree with you, because if you're a startup, I don't know if the audience is mostly startups or investors, but if you're raising a fund, you want to have LPs who care about what you care about, right? I mean, if your LP wants you to invest in yet another fast delivery app, I don't think the world needs any other fast delivery app. We're oversaturated. Nobody needs that, You want to have LPs who actually care about making sure, we feed more people, or we plant more trees, or whatever you really care about, or we clean the ocean. So I think that's super important. For example, in what I'm building now, I only want to take on investors who will pledge to have equality on their boards, investors who say by the year 2060, we'll have equal amount of men and women on our boards. So as a be it investor, be it a startup, really important that you, and Kim will talk more about it surely, but have your metrics, have your goals. I find like it's really important to have integrity in this. If we are to make an impact, we really have to have integrity and really keep to our boundaries, not to take any money, because once you accept money, it's very difficult to get rid of that person from your cap table, or your LP table.
Great, thank you for weighing in, Vera. And I know that you have to take off. You said you have
No. 5 minutes before the full hour, so I'm still here. And maybe another one that I wanted to also talk about, because we all spoke about impact and impact investing. I'm also a part of the steering committee here in the Middle East for female angels. And what it all comes down to a lot is education. We need to educate people more. What is it actually? So we talk about it, and like Adrienne was saying, it's so difficult to find answers. What is it? What is it not? Just because we're all learning pretty much about it still. I think there are good resources out there. I mean, we don't have to look far. Village Capital has done great work on that as well. I always say that you guys are so intentional about choosing your startups in your cohorts. It's such a diverse group. Of all the accelerators where I mentor, it's the most diverse group in terms of region and gender and age, especially age. You don't just take young white male founders. You actually have all kind of age and religion. So I think education, I see that happening a lot, that people don't actually know, so that they end up not investing. But if we create more educational, be it in forms of such seminars, but even more in smaller groups, then we can, I think, advance that topic. So I would say education is key in order to understand investing and impact investing.
Can I just add one quick thing before we move to Kim, just a sort of sanity check also on what isn't impact investing or what is. I think it's also really important to understand what are the byproducts of the products that you're building and the platforms you're building, and making sure that they're not sort of negating the positive effects of what you're bringing into the world. So there's a lot of cases, especially, things like production of solar panels, the expansion of the metaverse, like the amount of energy and servers that are required to create those metaverse environments, and then the production of chemicals as sort of byproducts of those processes for the solar panels also have very negative effects on the environment. So that's also something that as investors and entrepreneurs building and investing in these sorts of impact-oriented concepts, you really need to be mindful of, and research is also part of that, understanding what your sort of sphere of influence is.
Perfect segue to Kim, which I really appreciate. That kind of concludes the main part of our panel discussion. We're now going to switch over to talk a little about what tools. I think a lot of it's like, a lot of what we've heard is, how can you measure this? How can you present it to LPs? And how can you kind of align on what you are looking to achieve, both financially and then in terms of impact? I think the financials have been pretty well established of how you can track that. It's traditional venture capital industry. And so there's one more question about microfinance, which I will get to at the end. How do you track it? And then also, how do you track the negative aspects of it? I met Kim in our cohort in 2022 on financial technology in Europe. Our company was fairly early, and we were really excited to have her as an early stage. I've seen her grow and progress, and she's most recently started an impact report for our female-focused sustainability cohort that we have running. One of the best examples of impact measurement tools that I have seen, and I've seen a number of them, but we're going to turn over to Kim for about 10 minutes-ish, and we'll still have 7 minutes left over to talk about, like, how do you measure impact? And what are some different tools? I know you're going to talk about your platform, but also maybe just more broadly, how's the industry trying to measure impact, and what are some of the pros and cons of using SDGs versus ESGs versus a million, whatever alphabet soup of impact measurement, and, you know, IRIS, you know, there's just so many. So I will turn that 10 minutes to talk about how do you measure impact.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And thank you, everyone. I think this panel so far is incredible because they've pretty much set up absolutely everything I either was going to say or need to say. So bear with me 1 second. I do have a number of slides because I think it just helps to ground this stuff in what you can see. So I think, you know, what we have heard so far is obviously that shift from going, you know, we're not talking about now or these days so much about what companies tick the right boxes. It's about what, you know, what are they really contributing? And ESG, it has copped a lot of flack actually in the last month. And I actually would say it's a little unwarranted because ESG was never designed to answer the questions we are now asking of it. ESG is designed effectively, it's risk-based, and to look at how a company behaves. I did see a question in the chat, actually, someone about healthcare and health, and actually, if you can read it, on the left-hand side is the ESG metrics that MSCI use for a medical center. And on a social sense, what they are looking at is, do they have good data privacy? Do they have good labor management? Do they have good product safety? That is kind of that ESG thing. But the questions we are asking as impact investors, and the world, I guess, is asking is, you know, what impact does delivering a medical center have? On whom, where, how much, and how do we know it's so? And that's the kind of right-hand side. That's what Vested measures. That's what other impact assessments, you know, aim to measure. And that's where we need to move to. I think so many people kind of said it. I think Mirko probably said it best about, you know, we're kind of seeing in the middle now about 99% of companies trying to grapple with this are sitting in the middle of this, which I kind of call the danger zone, to quote Top Gun, because it is where the greenwashing is happening. But it is a case of, to Mirko's point, you know, they're not having too much choice these days on consumers asking these questions of them. But they also aren't quite really attuned to how to answer them. And my big concerns, what I see as greenwashing, is kind of broad brush statements from companies that say, you know, we help, you know, we're a bank, so we help poverty, and that's it. And if you sit in the middle here, or you see companies that kind of make those statements, unfortunately, both from the regulators, as we've seen in the last few weeks, but also from society, if you can't then stand behind that and evidence that to say, okay, what parts of poverty. How? How do you know that's so? You're really at a big risk here, reputationally, but also it's a risk to genuinely making a good impact, right? So that's the kind of shift and where we're dealing with at the moment. So just in terms of, and I think Ariane set this up really well on how do you measure impact. I come from the development space, so the good news is that measuring impact isn't actually new. It has been around for decades in the charity and development world. It was really about how we adapt this now to the private sector. What you see is pretty much what Adrienne said, and it probably looks very familiar to you, which is companies have a pretty good grasp now, or they're getting better at saying, you know, we know what our inputs are, we know what we do, you know, we manufacture water purification tablets, and look, we delivered 4,000 water purification tablets. Isn't that great? But the problem with that, which is what that kind of 99% we see, is that's not impact. To Adrienne's point, you know, what impact is the change that is created from those activities, those outcomes being achieved. We deal a lot with capital market companies, and you know, Vodacom in Africa is a good example. They'll say they delivered 2 million mobile subscriptions. That's fantastic. But the real impact is, how has that changed access to basic affordable internet? How has that changed access to mobile banking? And that's all the stuff on the right-hand side that helps you tell the impact story with evidence. It helps you complete the metrics. There's a few questions on KPIs. Companies are quite good at the left-hand side. They know what they do, and they can measure often what they deliver. But making sure they complete the impact story by linking those to the metrics of change is really important. But it is really hard. It is really hard. A lot of companies will say this is data outside our control, and that's true. But the good news is they don't have to measure it. It's already measured largely, and this is what the development world and what we realized has been doing for a long time. They can measure, the World Bank measures access to affordable internet. You know, it measures, you know, what you see on the screen. So if we, and what we did with Vested was, how do we pull in hundreds of millions of data points that assess change in the world and the issues that matter most, and how do we align that then and link it up with what companies do and what they say they do? Because if that narrative doesn't flow, that's where we can actually figure out sometimes companies that aren't maybe being as transparent or as accurate on their impact. So then just very quickly in terms of tools, most good impact methodologies are all the same. They're what you saw before. It's really about a theory of change. If you want good standards, the impact management project has to be one of the most understandable, I think, and really well done kind of transfers of measuring impact for the private sector. So if you're wanting to do this yourself, they give you some really good guidance, as do the kind of Global Impact Investing Network, on what you could look at. What you see there too on the right, a number of those tools there, they can actually help you measure it. So if you're wanting to quantify this more at scale, or make that full link with a system, these are the kind of systems, at least that, you know, that we think do it really well. Most of these will link to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. That I think is kind of important because they're kind of globally acknowledged. These are the problems. The only two things I'd say to look at when you're looking at using tools to help you is making sure that how much they require of data entry and input, because that can be costly on your startups, on you. So at Vested, we do it automated to try and help with that, but some people like to manage it themselves. And the second thing I'd say to look at, which was really raised, I think earlier by someone too, about having choice. Some of these systems will kind of automatically weight certain social issues as more important than others. And I just wave a bit of a flag at that, because some social issues are more important in specific areas to specific markets. So that's where, you know, it's not really up to us to decide. We can decide what we care about, but the data should decide then, you know, how impactful that really is. Now, I'm just going to quickly, in 1 minute, kind of give you an example. I think this is Vested, so I'm a little biased. This is our company and what we deliver, but this is how it can help you tell a narrative on a few things that matter to us. Christina mentioned really importantly 2 things. Negative impacts. So Vested, for any company, startup or big, can obviously assess impact, but it can also tell you where its negative impact is. Someone asked on the healthcare sector about health is inherently going to be more impactful. Yes, but they have quite a lot of negative impacts. So how you improve the impact, either of the companies you invest in, might be dealing with some of those negatives and mitigating that. Indirect is super important too, which Christina mentioned, because there is a flow-on effect of nearly everything you do. So finding and making sure that there is data and that the systems or processes you use account for that, we think is quite important to get in a comprehensive view. We talked about tying impact to returns. We do that at Vested, but impact isn't just a factor of what a company does, it's a factor of the world and the context. That's why that external data is really important. Because social issues will change as the world changes. Food security has rocketed. If you're an agri-tech company at the moment, you might have changed nothing to what you do, but your impact has soared because the world needs you more. And then, yeah, and for us, it's about, we ask 4 core questions, and most good frameworks will. Someone asked about, I think, pillars. Our pillars look at, is the company serving the people who need what they deliver the most? In problems that are important, because problems that are important to people in Estonia are going to be different to people in Greece. And that's where, you know, this depth of data is important. Is the solutions offered delivering value towards that? And at what effect can they do that? And if you do that right, you then just have all the data that helps you tell the narrative of what you help and where, negatives and flow-ons, and you know, all that stuff that you can then sign to that says these are the trends that tell us and that we're helping change. So that's just a really quick whiz on impact measurement from our side and from Vested and what we see. It is complex, it's hard, there's a lot of data, but there is some really good tools, and most of the time it's better to be roughly right than entirely wrong. Is still, I think, a lot of, you know, kind of vibe in this sector, and that we believe as well. So I'm just going to leave that there.
Thanks, Kim. I think it's really, there's a lot going on. I think there's a lot of different tools. It also depends on, basically, you have to be deciding what is impactful for your region. You know, like healthcare and education are very different levels of access to the United States versus Europe. And you go to different areas. I mean, so it really kind of where your market solution is being focused on. You know, there's differences around diversity and equity and inclusion in the US that are different than other areas. So I do think it's important to understand one reason why impact is such a sort of a spectrum of a conversation, because so much of it depends. Whereas market rates, you know, your market rates are going to depend on the market that you're at, and the level of capital that you have access to, but it's a little bit, it's cleaner than just this. And I think what your tool does, and I think what a lot of the impact measurement tools that have been evolving over the last 10 or 15 years, they're getting closer to tying it to like some of these larger goals and metrics where people can track it and trying to standardize it, but also realizing that there's market nuance. So thank you very much for that presentation. We've got a couple questions I wanted to address. One from the chat: what is impact investing, like micro lending versus impact investing? Basically, real quick, micro lending is small amounts of money, typically to SMEs, so smaller stage businesses that are probably more traditional mom and pops. And it's more like debt capital that you're looking to get back at a lower return than what a bank would typically charge. That would be micro lending. Impact investing is actually investing either for a portion of equity, or there's a couple different tools like revenue share, but basically somebody's giving you money with expectation that you're going to give them back that money at a markup, or not at a percentage, but probably like a multiple of return. So, you know, if I give you $1 million, I'm expecting $3 million in 5 years, something like that. So it's an actual investment, but it's an investment that might take a bit of a haircut or might have other factors than purely financial returns.
Maybe just on that really briefly, Ben,
Yep.
Why it's so important, and why I also mentioned, you know, microfinance before, because, and it might be, like Christina and Kimberly also said, not so relevant in certain parts of the world, but if we take into account that 1/3 of the population is unbanked, a third of our population in the world is unbanked. I mean, it's insane. It's hard for those of us who are based in Europe to believe and understand. But that's why it's such a big topic. And like you rightly just said, it depends on where you are. It depends on which region you're in the world, what kind of impact you want to create. Do you want to stay in that region? Do you want to go global? And that's why it's really important to make those decisions and align with your investors and LPs. So I just wanted to kind of bring this into account that, I mean, yeah, how big those problems actually are if we look globally.
Yeah, thank you. And we're coming up on time. I will stay on a little bit longer to address any outstanding questions, but I do want to give a chance. Are there any final comments or thoughts that the panelists want to share? First, before we go, I want to thank you all for giving us an hour of your time. I thought it's been great to dive into some of these questions with you all in a sort of a non-traditional panel. Let everybody talk about it, what they have. I thought that it's really so many nuances. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways, is that it really depends on what you're looking for, what your ecosystem you're operating in, and what you want to return, what your LPs or partners want to return, and sort of what you negotiate. So a lot of it is a conversation, but it's understanding some of these terms, it's understanding some of these tools, and then it's starting to have those conversations before you raise the funds or you switch your thesis. But I think really it's like getting that down and understanding what data you want to be collecting from the outset is going to be really, really critical, whether you're an impact investor, or you're an investor and you're trying to get into the impact space, or you're an entrepreneur, like coming with the data that you're going to be able to track and what that will be able to share. I think when we're using Kim's tool to track one of our portfolios, one of our cohorts, and sharing that with our partner as to like the narrative. It actually is a very powerful tool that oftentimes is just done in anecdotes. And I think bringing data into it is something that has been avoided for quite some time because it's hard and it costs money, but I think it will help you, set you up to be in a better place to either receive more money or distribute more money, or talk about the additional things that the money has done for you or your company, because it's not just about how much revenue or how much growth you've gone through. It's also like, what is the impact of your company? Mirko, I don't know, I will just go real quick. Final comments, Mirko, then Adrian, then Andreas, and Christina, and Vera, I think you might have to jump.
Yes, I would like to say that the impact that I wanted to create here is to draw some investment to the Central Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe, because they say that most of impact investors invest in a region they're coming from. And this is especially the case now because we can see in Q1 of 2022 that there are new funds that are emerging in a region. And just a couple of years ago, you can make a significant change with a small ticket. Now the things are changing because after the golden era of the turmoil from communism to capitalism, there is a huge chance in a region that can tackle the issues like depopulation, because 23% of population, for example, in the Western Balkans is going to diminish by 2050. Lithuania is going to have the same number of working adults in 2030 as they did in 1950. So imagine what is the opportunity to make a change. And what I wanted to mention here is that Kimberly is doing a great job. There's some additional I would say, presentations that can showcase that this is the right region to invest. But I would like to finish my comments with the person that we mentioned a few times before, that is Professor Yunus, that says that for impact investing, you don't need a deep experience, you need a deep commitment. And that is the reason why he created the microcredit and get the Nobel Prize. So I would say that we live in the age where if you're making your first investment choice, choose properly and choose something that will create an impact. Thank you.
A good quote to end on. Thank you, Mirko. I don't know, folks, if you have to drop, that's fine. I just want to, I'll go over extra 5, maybe 10 minutes. I just want everyone to have a chance to say their final thoughts, because I do think it's been a very enlightening conversation. Andreas?
Yes, I really enjoyed this conversation. I learned myself, and that's my major point also, and my major message. The motivation, the commitment, as you just mentioned, but also to be trained, to be educated. If we do investment as a business angel or as any person, out of passion, out of emotion, I appreciate that. But the likelihood that this is done on solid ground is not so great. Maybe it's better to do it with a passion and with a positive energy on the ground of being educated. So again, as us as a business angel association, we want to have passionate people with the financial means and with the education, and we would like to also provide this in discussions, in this kind of sessions as we have right now, to enable people with the intellectual and with the experience as well to do the right investments. I mean, because we also started on this road, and we did now a very nice investment, some of our business angels, in second use of clothes, swapping clothes for children. All these things, I think by experience, but it will take some time, they will have a great message. So to educate people and to bring this passionate message, I think that's the way to the future. So again, I thank you all very much. I enjoyed this very, very deeply. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining, for your comments. It's a warm community. Come join us. people really will support you as your journey. There's not a lot of judgment. If you don't know anything, come in with an open mind. I think there's a lot to share, a lot of good conversations, a lot of good back and forth, and a lot of sticky conversations to be had. But I think a lot of us have been in the space for a while and can address some of these issues, and some of them are just long-standing issues. Christina, and then I'll turn over to Adrian for final thoughts before we close out.
Just a quick thing I'll mention is, I think what's interesting in the VC space is that you're starting to see a lot more creativity in how they structure their funds, how they structure their compensation. And I see a bit of a trend slowly starting where the general partners will also link their compensation not only to their commercial impact, but also to their environmental or social impact in whatever way they focus on from an impact perspective. So obviously those tools around reporting are super important so that they can make sure that they have a way to, fairly and accurately track how they measure that impact and of their portfolio companies. But that for me is quite interesting. So I think many of the people in the audience probably know about a hurdle rate when it comes to your investment returns. But in these cases, Rubio Impact is one VC that I know of here in the Netherlands that adopts this in their compensation. They have a hurdle rate also for their impact measurements. So that's also maybe something to investigate a little bit if you're thinking as a VC, how can you really hold yourself accountable to actually bringing about the positive societal change that you're looking to bring with your fund investments?
Really good point. It's an evolving field. There's a lot of new tools. There's revenue share. There's different types of capital return. There's a blended finance aspect of government money with private money and leveraging that to social impact bonds. There's a lot of different instruments being created right now. And then even on the back end, how you're doing compensation frameworks for different companies or for investment funds. A lot of people are trying to address this in different ways. So I think it's a great point. And you just have to stay on top of it. But that's definitely great to end on. And then finally, so thank you so much for your comments and sharing your story, Christina. Adrian, any final words before we wrap up?
Super quick, Christina, that was a really good point, because it's kind of the opposite of what we mentioned earlier in terms of the whole sort of greenwashing, that side of things. I think that we are going to see kind of a lot of competition about who can really do this well now. And, so that's the other side of it, which is, and there's going to be some amazing creative solutions, as you mentioned, and really kind of more and more of a push towards, more transparency, more honesty, more bottom line, evaluations and things. So I think they're definitely echo what everyone said. It's a very positive and super great place to be right now as it's evolving. Thank you all very, very much. I've copied the questions from the chat and from the Q&A section, and some of them we didn't get answered. So maybe Ben, you and I, and we can reach out to all the panelists here, guys, to put together some answers and maybe just toss those up on LinkedIn. See, just to take the conversation a little bit further, we've got a lot of ideas about where this might go, specifically regarding this region of the world, but obviously, having some spillover everywhere else. So again, thanks everybody very much. And I don't know, Kim, if you have any final thoughts.
No, I think it's fine. I think everyone has summed it up really well.
Great. Well, everybody watch the space on LinkedIn. Can we say, is this fair to say we can throw it up on Village Capital and Anthologies? We'll just put them up on our LinkedIn pages and answers to the questions.
Absolutely.
And,
yeah. We're at time. We went over 7. I've got to jump to another meeting.
Yeah, we'll tag everybody. So take care. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks so much. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.
Thanks to all your time for the attendees. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.